Chapter 11. Korak, returning from the hunt, heard the jabbering of the excited monkeys. He knew that something was seriously amiss. Histah, the snake, had doubtless coiled his slimy folds about some careless Manu. The youth hastened ahead. The monkeys were Miriam's friends. He would help them if he could. He traveled rapidly along the middle terrace. In the tree by Miriam's shelter, he deposited his trophies of the hunt and called aloud to her. There was no answer. He dropped quickly to a lower level. She might be hiding from him. Upon a great branch where Miriam often swung at indolent ease, he saw Gika propped against the tree's great bole. What could it mean? Miriam had never left Gika thus alone before. Korak picked up the doll and tucked it in his belt. He called again, more loudly, but no Miriam answered his summons. In the distance, the jabbering of the excited Manus was growing less distinct. Could their excitement be in any way connected with Miriam's disappearance? The bare thought was enough. Without waiting for Akut, who was coming slowly along some distance in his rear, Korak swung rapidly in the direction of the chattering mob. But a few minutes sufficed to overtake the rearmost. At sight of him, they fell to screaming and pointing downward ahead of them, and a moment later Korak came within sight of the cause of their rage. The youth's heart stood still in terror as he saw the limp body of the girl across the hairy shoulders of a great ape. That she was dead he did not doubt, and in that instant there arose within him a something which he did not try to interpret, nor could have had he tried. But all at once the whole world seemed centered in that tender, graceful body, that frail little body hanging so pitifully limp and helpless across the bulging shoulders of the brute. He knew then that little Miriam was his world, his sun, his moon, his stars. With her going had gone all light and warmth and happiness. A groan escaped his lips, and after that a series of hideous roars, more bestial than the beasts, as he dropped plummet-like in mad descent toward the perpetrator of this hideous crime. The bull-ape turned at the first note of this new and menacing voice, and as he turned a new flame was added to the rage and hatred of the killer, for he saw that the creature before him was none other than the king-ape, which had driven him away from the great anthropoids to whom he had looked for friendship and asylum. Dropping the body of the girl to the ground, the bull turned to battle anew for possession of his expensive prize. But this time he looked for an easy conquest. He, too, recognized Korak. Had he not chased him away from the amphitheater without even having to lay a fang or paw upon him? With lowered head and bulging shoulders, he rushed headlong for the smooth-skinned creature who was daring to question his right to his prey. They met head-on like two charging bulls, to go down together, tearing and striking. Korak forgot his knife. Rage and bloodlust such as his could be satisfied only by the feel of hot flesh between rending fangs, by the gush of new life blood against his bare skin, for, though he did not realize it, Korak, the killer, was fighting for something more compelling than hate or revenge. He was a great male fighting another male for a she of his own kind. So impetuous was the attack of the man-ape that he found his hold before the anthropoid could prevent him. A savage hold, with strong jaws closed upon a pulsing jugular, and there he clung, with closed eyes, while his fingers sought another hold upon the shaggy throat. It was then that Miriam opened her eyes. At the sight before her, they went wide. "Korak," she cried. "Korak, my Korak, I knew that you would come. Kill him, Korak, kill him." And with flashing eyes and heaving bosom the girl, coming to her feet, ran to Korak's side to encourage him. Nearby lay the killer's spear, where he had flung it as he charged the ape. The girl saw it and snatched it up. No faintness overcame her in the face of this battle primeval at her feet. For her, there was no hysterical reaction from the nerve strain of her own personal encounter with the bull. She was excited, but cool and entirely unafraid. Her Korak was battling with another Mangani that would have stolen her. But she did not seek the safety of an overhanging bough there to watch the battle from afar, as would a she-Mangani. Instead, she placed the point of Korak's spear against the bull-ape's side and plunged the sharp point deep into the savage heart. Korak had not needed her aid, for the great bull had been already as good as dead, with the blood gushing from his torn jugular. But Korak rose smiling, with a word of approbation for his helper. How tall and fine she was! Had she changed suddenly within the few hours of his absence, or had his battle with the ape affected his vision? He might have been looking at Miriam through new eyes for the many startling and wonderful surprises his gaze revealed. How long it had been since he had found her in her father's village, a little Arab girl he did not know, for time is of no import in the jungle, and so he had kept no track of the passing days. But he realized, as he looked upon her now, that she was no longer such a little girl as he had first seen playing with Geeka beneath the great tree just within the palisade. The change must have been very gradual to have eluded his notice until now. And what was it that had caused him to realize it so suddenly? His gaze wandered from the girl to the body of the dead bull. For the first time there flashed to his understanding the explanation of the reason for the girl's attempted abduction. Korak's eyes went wide, and then they closed to narrow slits of rage as he stood glaring down upon the abysmal brute at his feet. When next his glance rose to Miriam's face, a slow flush suffused his own. Now, indeed, was he looking upon her through new eyes, the eyes of a man looking upon a maid. Akut had come up just as Miriam had speared Korak's antagonist. The exultation of the old ape was keen. He strutted, stiff-legged and truculent about the body of the fallen enemy. He growled and upcurved his long, flexible lip. His hair bristled. He was paying no attention to Miriam and Korak. Back in the uttermost recesses of his little brain, something was stirring, something which the sight and smell of the great bull had aroused. The outward manifestation of the germinating idea was one of bestial rage, but the inner sensations were pleasurable in the extreme. The scent of the great bull and the sight of his huge and hairy figure had wakened in the heart of Akut a longing for the companionship of his own kind. So Korak was not alone undergoing a change. And Miriam, she was a woman. It is woman's divine right to love. Always she had loved Korak. He was her big brother. Miriam alone underwent no change. She was still happy in the companionship of her Korak. She still loved him, as a sister loves an indulgent brother, and she was very, very proud of him. In all the jungle there was no other creature so strong, so handsome, or so brave. Korak came close to her. There was a new light in his eyes as she looked up into them, but she did not understand it. She did not realize how close they were to maturity, nor aught of all the difference in their lives the look in Korak's eyes might mean. "Miriam," he whispered, and his voice was husky as he laid a brown hand upon her bare shoulder. "Miriam." Suddenly he crushed her to him. She looked up into his face, laughing, and then he bent and kissed her full upon the mouth. Even then she did not understand. She did not recall ever having been kissed before. It was very nice. Miriam liked it. She thought it was Korak's way of showing how glad he was that the great ape had not succeeded in running away with her. She was glad, too, so she put her arms about the killer's neck and kissed him again and again. Then, discovering the doll in his belt, she transferred it to her own possession, kissing it as she had kissed Korak. Korak wanted her to say something. He wanted to tell her how he loved her, but the emotion of his love choked him, and the vocabulary of the Mangani was limited. There came a sudden interruption. It was from Akut, a sudden low growl, no louder than those he had been giving vent to the while he pranced about the dead bull, nor half so loud in fact, but of a timbre that bore straight to the perceptive faculties of the jungle beast ingrained in Korak. It was a warning. Korak looked quickly up from the glorious vision of the sweet face so close to his. Now his other faculties awoke. His ears, his nostrils were on the alert. Something was coming. The killer moved to Akut's side. Miriam was just behind them. The three stood like carved statues gazing into the leafy tangle of the jungle. The noise that had attracted their attention increased, and presently a great ape broke through the underbrush a few paces from where they stood. The beast halted at sight of them. He gave a warning grunt back over his shoulder, and a moment later, coming cautiously, another bull appeared. He was followed by others, both bulls and females with young until 200 hairy monsters stood glaring at the three. It was the tribe of the dead king ape. Akut was the first to speak. He pointed to the body of the dead bull. "Korak, mighty fighter, has killed your king," he grunted. "There is none greater in all the jungle than Korak, son of Tarzan. Now Korak is king. What bull is greater than Korak?" It was a challenge to any bull who might care to question Korak's right to the kingship. The apes jabbered and chattered and growled among themselves for a time. At last a young bull came slowly forward, rocking upon his short legs, bristling, growling, terrible. The beast was enormous, and in the full prime of his strength. He belonged to that almost extinct species for which white men have long sought upon the information of the natives of the more inaccessible jungles. Even the natives seldom see these great, hairy, primordial men. Korak advanced to meet the monster. He, too, was growling. In his mind a plan was revolving. To close with this powerful, untired brute after having just passed through a terrific battle with another of his kind would have been to tempt defeat. He must find an easier way to victory. Crouching, he prepared to meet the charge which he knew would soon come, nor did he have long to wait. His antagonist paused only for sufficient time to permit him to recount for the edification of the audience and the confounding of Korak. A brief resume of his former victories, of his prowess, and of what he was about to do to this puny Tarmangani. Then he charged. With clutching fingers and wide-open jaws, he came down upon the waiting Korak with the speed of an express train. Korak did not move until the great arms swung to embrace him. Then he dropped low beneath them, swung a terrific right to the side of the beast's jaw as he sidestepped his rushing body, and swinging quickly about, stood ready over the fallen ape where he sprawled upon the ground. It was a surprised anthropoid that attempted to scramble to its feet. Froth flecked its hideous lips. Red were the little eyes, blood-curdling roars tumbled from the deep chest, but it did not reach its feet. The killer stood waiting above it, and the moment that the hairy chin came upon the proper level, another blow that would have felled an ox sent the ape over backward. Again and again the beast struggled to arise, but each time the mighty Tarmangani stood waiting with ready fist and pile-driver blow to bowl him over. Weaker and weaker became the efforts of the bull. Blood smeared his face and breast. A red stream trickled from nose and mouth. The crowd that had cheered him on at first with savage yells now jeered him. Their approbation was for the Tarmangani. "Kagoda?" inquired Korak as he sent the bull down once more. Again the stubborn bull essayed to scramble to his feet. Again the killer struck him a terrific blow. Again he put the question, "Kagoda, have you had enough?" For a moment the bull lay motionless. Then from between battered lips came the single word, "Kagoda." "Then rise and go back among your people," said Korak. "I do not wish to be king among people who once drove me from them. Keep your own ways, and we will keep ours. When we meet, we may be friends, but we shall not live together." An old bull came slowly toward the killer. "You have killed our king," he said. "You have defeated him who would have been king. You could have killed him had you wished. What shall we do for a king?" Korak turned toward Akut. "There is your king," he said. But Akut did not want to be separated from Korak, although he was anxious enough to remain with his own kind. He wanted Korak to remain too. He said as much. The youth was thinking of Miriam, of what would be best and safest for her. If Akut went away with the apes, there would be but one to watch over and protect her. On the other hand, were they to join the tribe, he would never feel safe to leave Miriam behind when he went out to hunt, for the passions of the ape folk are not ever well controlled. Even a female might develop an insane hatred for the slender white girl and kill her during Korak's absence. "We will live near you," he said at last. "When you change your hunting ground, we will change ours, Miriam and I, and so remain near you, but we shall not dwell among you." Akut raised objections to this plan. He did not wish to be separated from Korak. At first, he refused to leave his human friend for the companionship of his own kind. But when he saw the last of the tribe wandering off into the jungle again, and his glance rested upon the lithe figure of the dead king's young mate as she cast admiring glances at her lord's successor, the call of blood would not be denied. With a farewell glance toward his beloved Korak, he turned and followed the she-ape into the labyrinthine mazes of the wood. After Korak had left the village of the blacks following his last thieving expedition, the screams of his victim and those of the other women and children had brought the warriors in from the forest and the river. Great was the excitement, and hot was the rage of the men when they learned that the white devil had again entered their homes, frightened their women, and stolen arrows and ornaments and food. Even their superstitious fear of this weird creature who hunted with a huge bull ape was overcome in their desire to wreak vengeance upon him and rid themselves for good and all of the menace of his presence in the jungle. And so it was that a score of the fleetest and most doughty warriors of the tribe set out in pursuit of Korak and Akut. But a few minutes after they had left the scene of the killer's many depredations. The youth and the ape had traveled slowly and with no precautions against a successful pursuit, nor was their attitude of careless indifference to the blacks at all remarkable. So many similar raids had gone unpunished that the two had come to look upon the Negroes with contempt. The return journey led them straight upwind, the result being that the scent of their pursuers was borne away from them. So they proceeded upon their way in total ignorance of the fact that tireless trackers, but little less expert in the mysteries of woodcraft than themselves, were dogging their trail with savage insistence. The little party of warriors was led by Kovudu, the chief, a middle-aged savage of exceptional cunning and bravery. It was he who first came within sight of the quarry which they had followed for hours by the mysterious methods of their almost uncanny powers of observation, intuition, and even scent. Kovudu and his men came upon Korak, Akut, and Miriam after the killing of the king ape, the noise of the combat having led them at last straight to their quarry. The sight of the slender white girl had amazed the savage chief and held him gazing at the trio for a moment before ordering his warriors to rush out upon their prey. In that moment it was that the great apes came, and again the blacks remained awestruck witnesses to the palaver and the battle between Korak and the young bull. But now the apes had gone, and the white youth and the white maid stood alone in the jungle. One of Kovudu's men leaned close to the ear of his chief. "Look," he whispered, and pointed to something that dangled at the girl's side. "When my brother and I were slaves in the village of the sheik, my brother made that thing for the sheik's little daughter. She played with it always and called it after my brother, whose name is Gika. Just before we escaped, someone came and struck down the sheik, stealing his daughter away. If this is she, the sheik will pay you well for her return." Korak's arm had again gone around the shoulders of Miriam. Love raced hot through his young veins. Civilization was but a half-remembered state. London as remote as ancient Rome. In all the world there were, but they two. Korak, the killer, and Miriam, his mate. Again he drew her close to him and covered her willing lips with his hot kisses, and then from behind him broke a hideous bedlam of savage war cries, and a score of shrieking blacks were upon them. Korak turned to give battle. Miriam, with her own light spear, stood by his side. An avalanche of barbed missiles flew about them. One pierced Korak's shoulder, another his leg, and he went down. Miriam was unscathed, for the blacks had intentionally spared her. Now they rushed forward to finish Korak and make good the girl's capture. But as they came there came also from another point in the jungle the great Akut, and at his heels the huge bulls of his new kingdom. Snarling and roaring, they rushed upon the black warriors when they saw the mischief they had already wrought. Kovudu, realizing the danger of coming to close quarters with these mighty ape men, seized Miriam and called upon his warriors to retreat. For a time the apes followed them, and several of the blacks were badly mauled and one killed before they succeeded in escaping. Nor would they have gotten off thus easily had Akut not been more concerned with the condition of the wounded Korak than with the fate of the girl upon whom he had always looked as more or less of an interloper and an unquestioned burden. Korak lay bleeding and unconscious when Akut reached his side. The great ape tore the heavy spears from his flesh, licked the wounds, and then carried his friend to the lofty shelter that Korak had constructed for Miriam. Further than this, the brute could do nothing. Nature must accomplish the rest unaided, or Korak must die. He did not die, however. For days he lay helpless with fever, while Akut and the apes hunted close by that they might protect him from such birds and beasts as might reach his lofty retreat. Occasionally Akut brought him juicy fruits which helped to slake his thirst and allay his fever, and little by little his powerful constitution overcame the effects of the spear thrusts. The wounds healed and his strength returned. All during his rational moments, as he had lain upon the soft furs which lined Miriam's nest, he had suffered more acutely from fears for Miriam than from the pain of his own wounds. For her he must live. For her he must regain his strength that he might set out in search of her. What had the blacks done to her? Did she still live, or had they sacrificed her to their lust for torture and human flesh? Korak almost trembled with terror as the most hideous possibilities of the girl's fate suggested themselves to him out of his knowledge of the customs of Kovudu's tribe. The days dragged their weary lengths along, but at last he had sufficiently regained his strength to crawl from the shelter and make his way unaided to the ground. Now he lived more upon raw meat, for which he was entirely dependent on Akut's skill and generosity. With the meat diet, his strength returned more rapidly, and at last he felt that he was fit to undertake the journey to the village of the blacks. Chapter 12. Two tall, bearded white men moved cautiously through the jungle from their camp beside a wide river. They were Carl Jensen and Sven Malbin, but little altered in appearance since the day, years before, that they and their safari had been so badly frightened by Korak and Akut as the former sought haven with them. Every year had they come into the jungle to trade with the natives, or to rob them, to hunt and trap, or to guide other white men in the land they knew so well. Always since their experience with the sheikh had they operated at a safe distance from his territory. Now they were closer to his village than they had been for years, yet safe enough from discovery owing to the uninhabited nature of the intervening jungle and the fear and enmity of Kovudu's people for the sheik, who, in time past, had raided and all but exterminated the tribe. This year they had come to trap live specimens for a European zoological garden, and today they were approaching a trap which they had set in the hope of capturing a specimen of the large baboons that frequented the neighborhood. As they approached the trap, they became aware from the noises emanating from its vicinity that their efforts had been crowned with success. The barking and screaming of hundreds of baboons could mean naught else than that one or more of their number had fallen a victim to the allurements of the bait. The extreme caution of the two men was prompted by former experiences with the intelligent and dog-like creatures with which they had to deal. More than one trapper has lost his life in battle with enraged baboons who will hesitate to attack nothing upon one occasion, while upon another a single gunshot will disperse hundreds of them. Heretofore, the Swedes had always watched nearby their trap, for as a rule only the stronger bulls are thus caught, since in their greediness they prevent the weaker from approaching the covered bait. And when once within the ordinary rude trap woven on the spot of interlaced branches, they are able, with the aid of their friends upon the outside, to demolish their prison and escape. But in this instance, the trappers had utilized a special steel cage which could withstand all the strength and cunning of a baboon. It was only necessary, therefore, to drive away the herd, which they knew were surrounding the prison, and wait for their boys, who were even now following them to the trap. As they came within sight of the spot, they found conditions precisely as they had expected. A large male was battering frantically against the steel wires of the cage that held him captive. Upon the outside, several hundred other baboons were tearing and tugging in his aid, and all were roaring and jabbering and barking at the top of their lungs. But what neither the Swedes nor the baboons saw was the half-naked figure of a youth hidden in the foliage of a nearby tree. He had come upon the scene at almost the same instant as Jensen and Malbon, and was watching the activities of the baboons with every mark of interest. Korak's relations with the baboons had never been over-friendly. A species of armed toleration had marked their occasional meetings. The baboons and Akut had walked stiff-legged and growling past one another, while Korak had maintained a bared-fang neutrality. So now he was not greatly disturbed by the predicament of their king. Curiosity prompted him to tarry a moment, and in that moment his quick eyes caught the unfamiliar coloration of the clothing of the two Swedes behind a bush not far from him. Now he was all alertness. Who were these interlopers? What was their business in the jungle of the Mangani? Korak slunk noiselessly around them to a point where he might get their scent as well as a better view of them, and scarce had he done so when he recognized them. They were the men who had fired upon him years before. His eyes blazed. He could feel the hairs upon his scalp stiffen at the roots. He watched them with the intentness of a panther about to spring upon its prey. He saw them rise and, shouting, attempt to frighten away the baboons as they approached the cage. Then one of them raised his rifle and fired into the midst of the surprised and angry herd. For an instant, Korak thought that the baboons were about to charge, but two more shots from the rifles of the white men sent them scampering into the trees. Then the two Europeans advanced upon the cage. Korak thought that they were going to kill the king. He cared nothing for the king, but he cared less for the two white men. The king had never attempted to kill him. The white men had. The king was a denizen of his own beloved jungle. The white men were aliens. His loyalty, therefore, was to the baboon against the human. He could speak the language of the baboon. It was identical to that of the great apes. Across the clearing he saw the jabbering horde watching. Raising his voice, he shouted to them. The white men turned at the sound of this new factor behind them. They thought it was another baboon that had circled them, but though they searched the trees with their eyes, they saw nothing of the now silent figure hidden by the foliage. Again Korak shouted. "I am the killer," he cried. "These men are my enemies and yours. I will help you free your king. Run out upon the strangers when you see me do so, and together we will drive them away and free your king." And from the baboons came a great chorus. "We will do what you say, Korak." Dropping from his tree, Korak ran toward the two Swedes, and at the same instant 300 baboons followed his example. At sight of the strange apparition of the half-naked white warrior rushing upon them with uplifted spear, Jensen and Malbeen raised their rifles and fired at Korak. But in the excitement, both missed, and a moment later the baboons were upon them. Now their only hope of safety lay in escape, and dodging here and there, fighting off the great beasts that leaped upon their backs, they ran into the jungle. Even then they would have died but for the coming of their men, whom they met a couple of 100 yards from the cage. Once the white men had turned in flight, Korak gave them no further attention, turning instead to the imprisoned baboon. The fastenings of the door that had eluded the mental powers of the baboons yielded their secret immediately to the human intelligence of the killer, and a moment later the king baboon stepped forth to liberty. He wasted no breath in thanks to Korak, nor did the young man expect thanks. He knew that none of the baboons would ever forget his service, though as a matter of fact he did not care if they did. What he had done had been prompted by a desire to be revenged upon the two white men. The baboons could never be of service to him. Now they were racing in the direction of the battle that was being waged between their fellows and the followers of the two Swedes, and as the din of battle subsided in the distance, Korak turned and resumed his journey toward the village of Kovudu. On the way he came upon a herd of elephants standing in an open forest glade. Here the trees were too far apart to permit Korak to travel through the branches. A trail he much preferred, not only because of its freedom from dense underbrush and the wider field of vision it gave him, but from pride in his arboreal ability. It was exhilarating to swing from tree to tree, to test the prowess of his mighty muscles, to reap the pleasurable fruits of his hard-won agility. Korak joyed in the thrills of the high-flung upper terraces of the great forest, where, unhampered and unhindered, he might laugh down upon the great brutes who must keep forever to the darkness and the gloom of the musty soil. But here, in this open glade where Tantor flapped his giant ears and swayed his huge bulk from side to side, the ape-man must pass along the surface of the ground, a pygmy amongst giants. A great bull raised his trunk to rattle a low warning as he sensed the coming of an intruder. His weak eyes roved hither and thither, but it was his keen scent and acute hearing which first located the ape-man. The herd moved restlessly, prepared for fight, for the old bull had caught the scent of man. "Peace, Tantor," called the killer. "It is I, Korak, Tarmangani." The bull lowered his trunk, and the herd resumed their interrupted meditations. Korak passed within a foot of the great bull. A sinuous trunk undulated toward him, touching his brown hide in a half-caress. Korak slapped the great shoulder affectionately as he went by. For years he had been upon good terms with Tantor and his people. Of all the jungle folk he loved best, the mighty pachyderm, the most peaceful and at the same time the most terrible of them all. The gentle gazelle feared him not, yet Numa, lord of the jungle, gave him a wide berth. Among the younger bulls, the cows and the calves, Korak wound his way. Now and then another trunk would run out to touch him, and once a playful calf grasped his legs and upset him. The afternoon was almost spent when Korak arrived at the village of Kovudu. There were many natives lolling in shady spots beside the conical huts or beneath the branches of the several trees which had been left standing within the enclosure. Warriors were in evidence upon hand. It was not a good time for a lone enemy to prosecute a search through the village. Korak determined to await the coming of darkness. He was a match for many warriors, but he could not, unaided, overcome an entire tribe, not even for his beloved Miriam. While he waited among the branches and foliage of a nearby tree, he searched the village constantly with his keen eyes, and twice he circled it, sniffing the vagrant breezes which puffed erratically from first one point of the compass and then another. Among the various stenches peculiar to a native village, the ape-man's sensitive nostrils were finally rewarded by cognizance of the delicate aroma which marked the presence of her he sought. Miriam was there, in one of those huts, but which one he could not know without closer investigation, and so he waited with the dogged patience of a beast of prey until night had fallen. The campfires of the blacks dotted the gloom with little points of light, casting their feeble rays in tiny circles of luminosity that brought into glistening relief the naked bodies of those who lay or squatted about them. It was then that Korak slid silently from the tree that had hidden him and dropped lightly to the ground within the enclosure. Keeping well in the shadows of the huts, he commenced a systematic search of the village, ears, eyes, and nose constantly upon the alert for the first intimation of the near presence of Miriam. His progress must of necessity be slow, since not even the keen-eared curs of the savages must guess the presence of a stranger within the gates. How close he came to a detection on several occasions, the killer well knew from the restless whining of several of them. It was not until he reached the back of a hut at the head of the wide village street that Korak caught again, plainly, the scent of Miriam. With nose close to the thatched wall, Korak sniffed eagerly about the structure, tense and palpitant as a hunting hound. Toward the front and the door he made his way when once his nose had assured him that Miriam lay within. But as he rounded the side and came within view of the entrance, he saw a burly Negro armed with a long spear squatting at the portal of the girl's prison. The fellow's back was toward him, his figure outlined against the glow of cooking fires further down the street. He was alone. The nearest of his fellows were beside a fire 60 or 70 feet beyond. To enter the hut, Korak must either silence the sentry or pass him unnoticed. The danger in the accomplishment of the former alternative lay in the practical certainty of alarming the warriors nearby and bringing them and the balance of the village down upon him. To achieve the latter appeared practically impossible. To you or me it would have been impossible. But Korak, the killer, was not as you or I. There was a good 12 inches of space between the broad back of the black and the frame of the doorway. Could Korak pass through behind the savage warrior without detection? The light that fell upon the glistening ebony of the sentry's black skin fell also upon the light brown of Korak's. Should one of the many further down the street chance to look long in this direction, they must surely note the tall, light-colored, moving figure. But Korak depended upon their interest in their own gossip to hold their attention fast where it already lay, and upon the firelight near them to prevent them seeing too plainly at a distance into the darkness at the village end where his work lay. Flattened against the side of the hut, yet not arousing a single warning rustle from its dried thatching, the killer came closer and closer to the watcher. Now he was at his shoulder. Now he had wormed his sinuous way behind him. He could feel the heat of the naked body against his knees. He could hear the man breathe. He marveled that the dull-witted creature had not long since been alarmed. But the fellow sat there as ignorant of the presence of another as though that other had not existed. Korak moved scarcely more than an inch at a time, then he would stand motionless for a moment. Thus was he worming his way behind the guard when the latter straightened up, opened his cavernous mouth in a wide yawn, and stretched his arms above his head. Korak stood rigid as stone. Another step, and he would be within the hut. The black lowered his arms and relaxed. Behind him was the framework of the doorway. Often before had it supported his sleepy head, and now he leaned back to enjoy the forbidden pleasure of a catnap. But instead of the door frame, his head and shoulders came in contact with the warm flesh of a pair of living legs. The exclamation of surprise that almost burst from his lips was throttled in his throat by steel-thewed fingers that closed about his windpipe with the suddenness of thought. The black struggled to arise, to turn upon the creature that had seized him, to wriggle from its hold, but all to no purpose. As he had been held in a mighty vise of iron, he could not move. He could not scream, those awful fingers at his throat, but closed more and more tightly. His eyes bulged from their sockets, his face turned an ashy blue. Presently he relaxed once more, this time in the final dissolution from which there is no quickening. Korak propped the dead body against the doorframe. There it sat, lifelike in the gloom. Then the ape-man turned and glided into the Stygian darkness of the hut's interior. "Miriam," he whispered. "Korak, my Korak," came an answering cry, subdued by fear of alarming her captors, and half stifled by a sob of joyful welcome. The youth knelt and cut the bonds that held the girl's wrists and ankles. A moment later he had lifted her to her feet and, grasping her by the hand, led her towards the entrance. Outside, the grim sentinel of death kept his grisly vigil. Sniffing at his dead feet whined a mangy native cur. At sight of the two emerging from the hut, the beast gave an ugly snarl, and an instant later, as it caught the scent of the strange white man, it raised a series of excited yelps. Instantly, the warriors at the nearby fire were attracted. They turned their heads in the direction of the commotion. It was impossible that they should fail to see the white skins of the fugitives. Korak slunk quickly into the shadows at the hut's side, drawing Miriam with him, but he was too late. The blacks had seen enough to arouse their suspicions, and a dozen of them were now running to investigate. The yapping cur was still at Korak's heels, leading the searchers unerringly in pursuit. The youth struck viciously at the brute with his long spear, but, long accustomed to dodging blows, the wily creature made a most uncertain target. Other blacks had been alarmed by the running and shouting of their companions, and now the entire population of the village was swarming up the street to assist in the search. Their first discovery was the dead body of the sentry, and a moment later one of the bravest of them had entered the hut and discovered the absence of the prisoner. These startling announcements filled the blacks with a combination of terror and rage. But, seeing no foe in evidence, they were enabled to permit their rage to get the better of their terror, and so the leaders, pushed on by those behind them, ran rapidly around the hut in the direction of the yapping of the mangy cur. Here they found a single white warrior making away with their captive, and recognizing him as the author of numerous raids and indignities, and believing that they had him cornered and at a disadvantage, they charged savagely upon him. Korak, seeing that they were discovered, lifted Miriam to his shoulders and ran for the tree which would give them egress from the village. He was handicapped in his flight by the weight of the girl, whose legs would but scarce bear her weight, to say nothing of maintaining her in rapid flight, for the tightly drawn bonds that had been about her ankles for so long had stopped circulation and partially paralyzed her extremities. Had this not been the case, the escape of the two would have been a feat of little moment, since Miriam was scarcely a whit less agile than Korak, and fully as much at home in the trees as he. But with the girl on his shoulder, Korak could not both run and fight to advantage. And the result was that before he had covered half the distance to the tree, a score of native curs, attracted by the yelping of their mate and the yells and shouts of their masters, had closed in upon the fleeing white man, snapping at his legs and at last succeeding in tripping him. As he went down, the hyena-like brutes were upon him, and as he struggled to his feet, the blacks closed in. A couple of them seized the clawing, biting Miriam and subdued her. A blow upon the head was sufficient. For the ape-man, they found more drastic measures would be necessary. Weighted down as he was by dogs and warriors, he still managed to struggle to his feet. To right and left, he swung crushing blows to the faces of his human antagonists. To the dogs he paid not the slightest attention other than to seize the more persistent and wring their necks with a single quick movement of the wrist. A knobstick aimed at him by an ebon Hercules he caught and wrested from his antagonist. And then the blacks experienced to the full the possibilities for punishment that lay within those smooth, flowing muscles beneath the velvet-brown skin of the strange, white giant. He rushed among them with all the force and ferocity of a bull-elephant gone mad. Hither and thither he charged, striking down the few who had the temerity to stand against him, and it was evident that unless a chance spear thrust brought him down, he would rout the entire village and regain his prize. But old Kovudu was not to be so easily robbed of the ransom which the girl represented, and seeing that their attack, which had up to now resulted in a series of individual combats with the white warrior, he called his tribesmen off, and, forming them in a compact body about the girl and the two who watched over her, bid them do nothing more than repel the assaults of the ape-man. Again and again Korak rushed against this human barricade, bristling with spear points. Again and again he was repulsed, often with severe wounds to caution him to greater wariness. From head to foot he was red with his own blood, and at last, weakening from the loss of it, he came to the bitter realization that alone he could do no more to succor his Miriam. Presently an idea flashed through his brain. He called aloud to the girl. She had regained consciousness now and replied. "Korak goes," he shouted, "but he will return and take you from the Gomangani. Goodbye, my Miriam. Korak will come for you again." "Goodbye," cried the girl. "Miriam will look for you until you come." Like a flash, and before they could know his intention or prevent him, Korak wheeled, raced across the village, and with a single leap disappeared into the foliage of the great tree that was his highroad to the village of Kovudu. A shower of spears followed him, but their only harvest was a taunting laugh flung back from out the darkness of the jungle.